The young alchemist named Krell walked slowly through the ancient halls of the cosmic archives. His four eyes scanned the endless rows of crystal memory stones that stretched beyond sight. Each stone contained the complete history of a civilization. Some glowed bright blue, showing thriving species. Others had turned dark, marking extinct races. But there was one section that made every alchemist uncomfortable. It was the section painted in deep red warning colors. Krell's mentor, an old being named Voss, had warned him about this place. The red section contained records of civilizations that no longer existed because they had made one terrible mistake. They had provoked the species known as humans. Krell had heard stories about humans. Every young species in the galaxy heard them. The humans came from a small blue planet called Earth. They were soft creatures with no claws, no armor, and no natural weapons. They lived short lives of barely 100 cycles. By all logical standards, they should have been nothing more than prey animals. But the records told a very different story. Krell reached the first crystal stone in the red section. He placed his hand on it and let the memories flow into his mind. The stone was labeled the Vorkan Empire. The Vorkans had been a proud warrior race. They had conquered 17 star systems before they discovered Earth. When they first saw humans, they laughed. These weak creatures farmed the land and built simple cities. They had not even left their own planet yet. The Vorkans decided to enslave them. The first Vorkan ships entered Earth's atmosphere 3,000 years before the current era. They landed in what humans called ancient Mesopotamia. The Vorkans expected immediate surrender. Instead, humans attacked them with bronze weapons and stone arrows. The attacks did nothing against Vorkan armor, of course, but the Vorkans found it amusing rather than threatening. They enslaved several thousand humans and took them to their mining colonies. This was their first mistake. Within 50 cycles, humans had learned the Vorkan language perfectly. Within 100 cycles, they had figured out Vorkan technology. Within 200 cycles, the enslaved humans had started a rebellion that spread across all 17 Vorkan star systems simultaneously. The humans had been planning and waiting and communicating in secret codes the Vorkans never detected. The rebellion was brutal. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not seek honorable battle. They poisoned water supplies. They sabotaged ships in ways that caused them to explode in hyperspace. They turned Vorkan slaves against their masters. They used their short lifespans as weapons, sending suicide attackers into Vorkan command centers. The war lasted only 12 cycles. At the end, not a single Vorkan remained alive in the entire galaxy. The humans had not just defeated them. They had erased them completely. Even the Vorkan homeworld was burned until nothing could ever grow there again. Krell removed his hand from the stone. His hearts were beating fast. He had known the basics of this story, but seeing the actual records was different. The cold efficiency of the human campaign was terrifying. He moved to the next stone. This one was labeled the Crystalline Collective. The collective had been a hive mind species. They shared thoughts across millions of bodies. They believed themselves to be the most advanced form of life in the galaxy. When they encountered humanity 2,000 cycles ago, humans had just begun exploring space. The collective decided to absorb them into their hive mind, believing they were doing humans a favor. They captured a human colony ship carrying 3,000 people. The collective began their absorption process, which involved connecting human brains to their network. They expected the humans to merge peacefully into their collective consciousness. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human minds were different from any species the collective had ever absorbed. Human thoughts were chaotic. They were filled with contradictions, emotions, dreams, fears, hopes, and strange creative impulses. When human minds connected to the collective network, they did not merge quietly. They spread like a virus. Human thoughts infected the collective consciousness. Individual identities began forming among hive members for the first time in their history. The collective started experiencing something humans called disagreement. Then came argument. Then came war. The entire crystalline collective tore itself apart in civil conflict within 300 cycles. Factions formed around different human ideas and philosophies. They fought over concepts like freedom and individuality that had never existed in their species before. By the time the fighting ended, only a few thousand collective members remained. They had become separate individuals, traumatized and alone after millions of cycles of shared consciousness. Most of them chose to end their own existence rather than continue living with the terrible isolation of individual thought. Humans never fired a single weapon. They destroyed an entire civilization simply by thinking. Krell stepped back from the stone. He needed a moment to process this information. The collective had been one of the most powerful civilizations in galactic history, and humans had destroyed them accidentally, just by being what they were. He continued walking through the red section. There were hundreds of crystal stones here. Each one told a similar story with different details. The Grax Dominion thought they could defeat humans through biological warfare. They released a plague on human colonies that killed millions. Humans spent 50 cycles developing not just a cure, but a modified version of the plague that specifically targeted Grax biology. The modified plague was released simultaneously on all Grax worlds. There were no survivors. The Mentari philosophers believed they were too intelligent to be threatened by humans. They refused to see humans as equals and treated them with contempt at every diplomatic meeting. They blocked humans from trade routes and resources, confident that the primitive species could do nothing. Humans responded by developing technology the Mentari could not understand. Within 200 cycles, human science had advanced beyond anything the Mentari had achieved in 10,000 cycles of existence. Humans simply outgrew them and left them behind as an irrelevant species that eventually faded into extinction through their own stagnation. The Shadow Wraiths were energy beings who fed on fear. They attacked human colonies at night, trying to harvest terror from human minds. They discovered that humans were capable of feeling a level of fear no other species could match. But they also discovered something else. Humans could transform their fear into anger, and human anger was far more intense than human fear. The Shadow Wraiths who tried to feed on human rage burned themselves out. They became addicted to the intensity of human emotions and destroyed themselves seeking more. Krell reached the center of the red section. Here stood the largest crystal stone in the entire archives. It glowed with a disturbing mixture of colors that seemed to shift and change. This was the record of the Eternal Empire. The Eternal Empire had ruled half the galaxy for 1,000,000 cycles. They were the oldest and most powerful civilization that had ever existed. They had destroyed thousands of species before humans even evolved. When they encountered humanity 500 cycles ago, they considered humans barely worth noticing. But then humans did something that concerned the Eternal Empire. Humans unified. Different human nations and factions put aside their differences and formed a single government. The Eternal Empire had never seen a species do this before. Most species remained divided until they were conquered. The Emperor of the Eternal Empire decided that humans were a potential threat. He ordered a demonstration of power to remind humans of their place in the galaxy. A single Eternal Empire warship destroyed a human colony of 2 million people. The Emperor expected humans to submit in fear. Instead, something strange happened. Humans across all their worlds stopped what they were doing. They stopped their work. They stopped their entertainment. They stopped their arguments with each other. And then they began building. For 50 cycles, humans built. They constructed ships and weapons and technology at a rate no species had ever matched. They reverse-engineered Eternal Empire technology and improved upon it. They formed alliances with every species the Eternal Empire had ever wronged. They trained their soldiers with obsessive dedication. When humans finally attacked, they did not come seeking battle. They came seeking extinction. The war lasted 300 cycles. The Eternal Empire, which had existed for 1,000,000 cycles, was completely destroyed. Not just defeated, destroyed. Humans did not accept surrender. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate peace. For every human who had died in that destroyed colony, humans made sure 10,000 Eternal Empire citizens would never exist. They destroyed not just the Eternal Empire's present, but their future. They sterilized their worlds. They corrupted their genetic records. They erased their cultural achievements from every database they could find. When it was over, humans gathered every surviving record of the Eternal Empire and brought them here to the cosmic archives. They wanted the galaxy to remember what happened to civilizations that attacked humanity. Krell pulled his hand away from the stone. His entire body was trembling. He had known humans were dangerous. Every species knew that. But seeing the complete records, understanding the full scope of what humans were capable of, was overwhelming. He walked to the edge of the red section and found a small viewing window. Through it, he could see the station that orbited the archives. Several ships were docked there. One of them was a human vessel. Humans visited the archives regularly now. They came to study. They came to learn. They were polite and friendly and helpful to the archivists. They smiled and made jokes and shared their food and culture with anyone who showed interest. Watching them, it was easy to forget what they truly were. It was easy to see only the soft skin and the warm smiles and the short lifespans. It was easy to underestimate them. But Krell would never underestimate humans. Not after what he had seen today. Not after understanding the truth that these archives contained. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest, or the most intelligent, or the longest lived. But they possessed something no other species had. They possessed the ability to unify against threats. They possessed patience that could span generations. They possessed creativity that could transform any situation to their advantage. And most importantly, they possessed a capacity for vengeance that was truly without limit. Krell looked at the red section one final time before leaving. There were still empty spaces on the shelves. Empty spaces waiting for new crystal stones. Empty spaces for the records of civilizations that had not yet learned the lesson that every species eventually learned. Never provoke humanity's wrath. Somewhere in the galaxy, Krell knew some young and foolish species was probably planning to attack a human colony. They were probably confident in their strength. They were probably laughing at the soft, weak creatures who lived such short lives. And one day, their crystal stone would join the others in the red section of the cosmic archives. Krell left the archives and never entered the red section again. Some knowledge was too terrible to revisit. Some warnings were too clear to need repeating. The records remained, glowing quietly in the darkness, waiting for the next archivist who needed to understand why the galaxy treated humans with such careful respect. And in the distance, the human ship undocked from the station and jumped to hyperspace. Its crew completely unaware of the ancient terror their species inspired in every intelligent being who knew their history. That was perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. Humans did not see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as survivors. And that made them more dangerous than any civilization that had ever existed.